heat rising from the Georgia asphalt was nothing compared with the slow burn of humiliation building inside the unmarked sedan. Darius Ellison, a decorated military judge with years of service behind him, kept both hands on the steering wheel while a county officer tapped a nightstick against his window. This was not a routine traffic stop. It was a deliberate display of authority, shaped by prejudice and powered by the certainty that no one would challenge it. What Officer Blaine Harker did not know was that the man he had chosen to intimidate understood the law better than almost anyone Harker had ever encountered. The road cut through the sprawling pines of Oconee County, a quiet stretch of Route 441 where traffic was light and the shoulder was wide. Inside his meticulously maintained Ford Taurus, Darius drove in silence. He liked silence. After spending his days presiding over tense military tribunals at Fort Stewart, the soft rhythm of tires against pavement gave him a rare kind of peace. Darius was a colonel in the United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. He had served overseas, including in Iraq and Afghanistan, and had overseen some of the most difficult courts-martial of the modern military era. His mind was disciplined by years of case law, procedure, regulations, and constitutional analysis. He was not wearing a uniform. He had on a crisp white button-down shirt and navy slacks, and he was returning home after visiting his sister in Athens. His cruise control was set exactly at the posted limit of 55 miles per hour. His hands rested at the 10 and 2 positions. His driving was steady, careful, and completely lawful. Then a pair of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. Darius recognized the shape of a police cruiser. He did not tense. He had no reason to. His registration was current, his taillights worked, his vehicle was insured. He had not been drinking, speeding, drifting, or driving recklessly. He held his speed, expecting the cruiser to pass. Instead, it accelerated and moved close to his rear bumper. Darius's jaw tightened slightly. He knew the tactic. An officer could crowd a driver, create pressure, and wait for nerves to do the rest. A frightened driver might tap the brakes too hard, drift toward the center line, or make some small mistake that could later be described as suspicious driving. Darius did none of those things. He kept the Taurus centered in the lane. His breathing remained even. His eyes moved calmly between the road and the mirror. The cruiser followed him for several miles, close enough that the pressure was impossible to miss. Every part of Darius's driving remained deliberate. He did not speed up to create distance. He did not brake in irritation. He did not turn suddenly onto another road. He simply continued driving exactly as he had before the cruiser appeared. That mattered because he understood how easily an ordinary movement could later be described as nervous, evasive, or suspicious. He was not trying to prove anything to the officer behind him. He was simply refusing to give that officer a real traffic violation to use. The longer the cruiser stayed on his bumper, the clearer the pressure became. Darius recognized that the officer was not merely following traffic. The cruiser was waiting for him to make a mistake. His response was the same discipline he brought into a courtroom. Observe, remain calm, and do not let someone else's aggression control your decisions. Then the light bar came alive behind him. Darius calmly activated his right turn signal, slowed in a controlled manner, and pulled onto the gravel shoulder. He left enough room for the officer to approach safely. He shifted into park, turned off the engine, lowered all 4 windows, placed his keys on the dashboard, and returned both hands to the top of the steering wheel. It was a gesture of complete transparency. Darius knew the statistics. More importantly, he knew the reality of being a black man stopped on a lonely rural road in the Deep South. His rank did not shield his body. His legal knowledge did not make a nervous or hostile officer's weapon less dangerous. On the roadside, titles could become meaningless in an instant. In the side mirror, he watched the driver's door of the cruiser open. Officer Blaine Harker stepped out. Harker moved with the heavy confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. His uniform pulled tightly across his chest, and one hand rested near his service weapon as he approached. A second officer climbed from the passenger side. Deputy Nolan Pierce was younger, thinner, and less comfortable. He stayed near the back of the cruiser, watching. Harker stopped near the rear edge of the driver's door and leaned toward the open window. "Evening, boy," he said. The word was delivered with a familiar kind of condescension, casual enough to be denied later, deliberate enough to be understood immediately. Darius kept his eyes forward and took a slow breath. "Good evening, officer. Is there a reason you pulled me over?" "I ask the questions here." Harker snapped, tapping his knuckles against the door frame. "You were swerving, crossing the center line. You've been drinking." "I haven't been drinking, officer," Darius replied, "and I haven't left my lane. My cruise control has been set to the speed limit." "Don't get smart with me." Harker leaned closer. The smell of stale coffee and chewing tobacco drifted into the car. "I saw what I saw. Where are you headed in such a hurry? Whose car is this?" "I'm traveling home to Savannah," Darius said. "The vehicle belongs to me. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Keep your hands where I can see them." Darius did not immediately move toward the glove compartment. Instead, he calmly explained what he was about to do. It was a habit born from experience, a simple way to reduce the possibility that an ordinary movement could be misrepresented. "Officer, my license is in my wallet, in my back right pocket. My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. With your permission, I'll reach for my wallet first." Harker's eyes narrowed. Darius's composure seemed to frustrate him. Harker appeared to want fear, confusion, or an argument. Darius gave him none of it. "Just get it, slowly." Darius reached for his wallet and removed his Georgia driver's license. He deliberately did not show his military identification. That choice mattered to him. As a military judge, he believed deeply in the principle that civilians should receive basic dignity under the law whether they carried a title or not. He did not want special treatment because of rank. He wanted to know how this officer behaved when he believed he was dealing with an ordinary citizen. Harker snatched the license from his fingers and looked down at it. "Darius Ellison, Savannah. Long way from home. What kind of work do you do down there?" "I work for the government, officer." "Government work," Harker said with a mocking smile. "Welfare office, sanitation." Darius said nothing. His silence irritated Harker even more. The officer turned and walked back to the cruiser with the license in his hand. Darius watched him sit behind the wheel and begin typing into the computer terminal. Darius already knew what the search would show. Nothing. No warrants, no arrests, no criminal history, not even an unpaid parking ticket. His record was cleaner than the glass Harker had tapped with his knuckles. Darius's legal mind began organizing the encounter almost automatically. Delaware versus Prowse established limits on vehicle stops without reasonable suspicion. Harker's claim that Darius had been swerving was, from Darius's perspective, a fabrication. If the dash camera showed what he believed it showed, the supposed traffic violation would collapse under scrutiny. The wait stretched on. Eventually, Harker climbed out of the cruiser. His demeanor had changed. The earlier arrogance had hardened into frustration. He strode back to the Taurus. "Step out of the vehicle, Ellison." "May I ask why, officer?" Darius said. "Have you issued a citation for the alleged swerving?" "I said step out of the car." Harker's hand dropped toward his holster. Darius knew Pennsylvania versus Mims, which allows an officer to order a driver out of a vehicle during a lawful traffic stop for reasons of officer safety. He also believed this stop had never been lawful in the first place. But the shoulder of a dark rural road was not a courtroom. Arguing constitutional doctrine with an armed, agitated officer was not wisdom. The legal battle could come later, in a place where facts could be recorded, evidence preserved, and authority reviewed. "I'm complying, officer," Darius said clearly. "I wanted the cruiser's microphone to capture every word." He opened the door slowly and stepped out. At 6 feet 2 inches tall, Darius stood noticeably higher than Harker expected. The officer took a small step backward, then quickly recovered. "Turn around and face the car." Darius turned and placed his hands on the roof of the Taurus. "Officer, I'm unarmed. I do not consent to any search of my person or my vehicle." "Spread your legs." Harker kicked Darius's left foot outward to widen his stance. Then he began the pat-down. It was rough, invasive, and far more aggressive than Darius believed the situation justified. Harker ran his hands along Darius's sides, down his legs, and up his inseam, with unnecessary force. He emptied Darius's pockets and tossed his phone, wallet, and keys onto the roof. "What are you looking for?" Darius asked. "Got some dope hidden in the car, some stolen property?" I have nothing illegal on my person or in my vehicle, Darius said. Under Terry versus Ohio, a brief pat-down of outer clothing requires reasonable, articulable suspicion that the person is armed and presently dangerous. I've complied with every instruction. What is your reasonable suspicion? Harker stopped. For a moment, the legal language seemed to knock him off balance. His face reddened beneath the flashing lights. He looked over at Deputy Pierce, who had moved closer and now looked deeply uncomfortable. You think you're a lawyer or something, boy? I am simply a citizen who knows his rights. Well, out here, I'm the law. Pierce, bring me the cuffs. Pierce hesitated. Sir, he hasn't done anything. Bring me the cuffs. Pierce flinched, removed a pair of handcuffs, and handed them over. Harker seized Darius's right wrist and pulled it hard behind his back. Pain shot through his shoulder. Darius Ellison, you're being detained for resisting an officer and suspicious behavior. I have not resisted, Darius said loudly and clearly. I have complied with every physical command. You have no probable cause for an arrest. Shut your mouth. Harker closed the cuffs around Darius's wrists and tightened them until the metal bit painfully into his skin. He did not engage the safety lock. Darius's expression barely changed. The pressure pulsed through his hands as circulation became restricted, but his mind remained calm and analytical. False imprisonment, excessive force, deprivation of rights, under color of law, under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 242. Harker believed he was taking control. Darius saw a record being created. Harker shoved him against the side of the Taurus. Now I'm going to search the vehicle. Pierce, watch him. Officer Harker, Darius said, reading the name on the uniform. I explicitly deny consent to search my vehicle. You have no warrant, no probable cause, and no emergency circumstance that permits a warrantless search. Any search you conduct is against my express objection. Harker laughed. I smell marijuana. Darius stared at him. He did not smoke. No one smoked in his car. There was no marijuana inside it. To Darius, the statement was not a misunderstanding. It was a manufactured justification. He turned his head slightly toward the younger deputy. Deputy Pierce, you are witnessing a fabricated basis for a vehicle search. I strongly suggest that you document exactly what is happening in your report. Shut up, Harker barked. He opened the driver's door and began tearing through the car. Darius remained beside the Taurus in handcuffs while Harker searched. Papers came out of the glove compartment. Floor mats landed on the grass. The officer opened bags, moved personal belongings, and rummaged through the carefully packed contents of the trunk. He found nothing. No drugs, no weapons, no contraband. Only legal pads, civilian clothes, and a legal thriller Darius had packed for the trip. Harker slammed the trunk shut. Nothing in there, sir, Pierce asked quietly. Harker shot him a glare. He's good at hiding it. We've still got him on resisting. Put him in the cruiser. Pierce approached Darius with his eyes lowered. Come on, sir, please step into the car. Darius looked at him. Deputy Pierce, correct? Yes, sir. You have a duty to intervene when you witness another officer violating a citizen's constitutional rights. Silence does not make the conduct disappear. It can make you part of it. Pierce swallowed. I just do what he tells me, sir. Watch your head. He guided Darius into the hard plastic rear seat of the cruiser. The door closed. The interior was hot, cramped, and cage-like. Darius's arms were pinned behind him, and the cuffs were still painfully tight, yet his mind felt unusually clear. Harker had tried to reduce him to fear and humiliation on the side of a dusty road. Darius refused to surrender his dignity. Shin had faced war criminals, difficult commanders, and people who had spent years learning how to manipulate rules for power. A small county officer who mistook cruelty for authority did not frighten him. Harker climbed into the driver's seat and adjusted the rearview mirror until he could see Darius's face. You're going to learn some respect, Ellison. Darius looked directly into the mirror. Then he smiled. It was not the smile of someone trying to please his captor. It was the controlled expression of a man who had watched an opponent make one reckless move after another. We'll see, Officer Harker, Darius said softly. We'll see. The cruiser headed toward the Oconee County Sheriff's Department. Harker drove aggressively. He took turns hard enough to send Darius sliding across the rear seat. Darius had no seatbelt and could not use his hands to brace himself. His shoulder struck the divider more than once. Harker chuckled when he heard the impact. Deputy Pierce sat in the passenger seat, stiff and silent. Going to be a long stay for your boy. Back there, Pierce, Harker said loudly. We get these types all the time. They think knowing a few legal words gets them out of a holding cell. Darius focused on his breathing. He silently reviewed the Uniform Code of Military Justice, an old mental discipline that helped him stay grounded under pressure. He observed everything around him. The cruiser designation was Car 47. He memorized the route. He noted the turns, the distance, the behavior of both officers, and the sequence of events. Evidence, everything is evidence. Darius did not know how far the encounter would go, but he knew memory could become important if recordings disappeared or reports changed. He paid attention to Harker's words, Pierce's hesitation, the sequence of commands, the way the cuffs had been tightened, the fact that Harker had searched after consent was explicitly denied, and the fact that the search had produced nothing. None of those details felt small to him. He had spent much of his career listening to witnesses explain stressful events after the fact. He knew how pressure could blur sequence and make people uncertain about what came first. So he treated his own memory with the same care he expected from witnesses in court. He did not rehearse conclusions. He preserved facts. Even while the cruiser moved through the county roads, Darius was already separating what he felt from what he could later prove. The humiliation was real, the anger was real, but emotion alone would not decide what happened next. Evidence would. The cruiser pulled behind a low cinder block building. The Oconee County Sheriff's Department looked dated, isolated, and worn down by years of use. Harker pulled Darius from the rear seat by the arm, giving him little chance to find his balance with his wrists still bound. Walk. He shoved Darius toward the metal doors. Inside, cold air hit them immediately. The intake room smelled faintly of bleach and stale sweat. A tall wooden desk sat behind scratched bulletproof glass. Behind it was the shift commander, a heavy-set man with grey hair and tired eyes. His name tag read Sergeant Everett Sloan. Sloan looked up from a stack of paperwork. "What do we have of Blaine?" "Got a live one, Sarge," Harker said. "Pulled him over for swerving on Route 441. Refused lawful orders. Resisted detention. I suspected he was concealing narcotics, but we couldn't locate them at the scene." Sloan frowned and looked at Darius. Darius stood straight, despite the cuffs. His white shirt was rumpled, his wrists hurt and his belongings had been disturbed, but his voice and posture remained composed. "Resisting?" Sloan asked. "He doesn't look like he put up much of a fight." "Verbally non-compliant," Harker said, spouting fake legal terms, trying to intimidate a peace officer. Sloan pulled a booking form closer. "Name, Darius Ellison. Address." Darius gave his Savannah address. "You have identification on him?" Harker tossed the wallet into the tray. Sloan pulled it through the slot and examined the driver's license. "Occupation?" Darius met the sergeant's eyes. "I'm an attorney, Sergeant." Harker laughed. "An attorney? Sure you are. What do you do? Chase ambulances around Savannah?" Darius ignored him. "Sergeant Sloan, I want it clearly stated in this monitored facility that this arrest is unsupported by probable cause. I was stopped without lawful justification, searched without consent, and subjected to unnecessary force under color of authority. I request that these handcuffs be removed immediately. I pose no threat to anyone in this building." Sloan hesitated. He looked from Darius's calm face to Harker's flushed expression. Sloan had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize when something did not fit. The man in front of him did not behave like the combative suspect Harker was describing. There was something disciplined and authoritative about Darius that made the sergeant uneasy. "Take the cuffs off him, Blaine." "Sarge, he's combative." "I said take them off." Sloan's voice hardened. "He's inside a secure area. We don't keep a compliant suspect in cuffs without a reason." Harker moved behind Darius and unlocked the restraints with obvious irritation. Darius brought his arms forward and winced slightly as circulation returned to his hands. Deep red marks circled his wrists. Raised them just enough to make sure the station cameras had a clear view. "Empty your pockets on the counter," Sloan said. "Belt and shoelaces too." Darius complied with the booking process. His belongings were catalogued and placed into a clear property bag. Sloan pointed toward the fingerprint scanner. "Put your fingers on the glass." As Darius was fingerprinted, Harker leaned against the wall and chewed on a toothpick. "You're real quiet now, Counselor." Reality sinking in. "You're going to sit in a cell until a magistrate becomes available. Nobody in here cares what kind of law degree you claim to have." Darius finished at the scanner and walked back toward the counter. "I'm entitled to a telephone call, Sergeant. I assume you won't deny me that right?" Sloan nodded toward a heavy phone mounted on the wall. "Make it quick." Darius walked over and picked up the receiver. He did not need to look up the number. He dialed a secure line at Fort Stewart. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Staff Judge Advocate's Office, Colonel Warren Calloway speaking." "Warren, it's Darius." The change in Darius's voice was immediate. The calm, civilian suspect disappeared. In his place was the measured command presence of a senior military officer. Both Sloan and Harker looked over. "Darius, where are you?" Calloway asked, concern rising in his voice. "You were supposed to be back for briefing preparation." "I've been delayed," Darius said. "I'm currently being unlawfully detained at the Oconee County Sheriff's Department. I was subjected to an illegal traffic stop, a warrantless search without valid probable cause, and a false arrest by an officer named Blaine Harker." There was a brief silence. "Are you injured?" "I have minor cuts and bruising from handcuffs that were applied excessively tight. Nothing requiring immediate medical care. I'm sending a Judge Advocate General liaison and federal authorities to your location. Do not discuss the substance of the case with these officers." "Understood, Warren. I'll wait for their arrival." Darius hung up. The click of the receiver sounded unusually loud in the intake room. He turned around. Sergeant Sloan was staring at him with growing concern. Harker, however, still seemed convinced that Darius's calm could be dismissed. "Who was that?" Harker asked. "Your mother?" Darius walked back to the counter without acknowledging him. He looked directly at Sloan. "Sergeant, I strongly recommend that you preserve every piece of dash camera footage, body camera audio, dispatch traffic, and station surveillance connected with this incident. If any evidence disappears after this point, it may become part of a federal obstruction investigation, in addition to the civil rights issues already involved." Sloan swallowed. "Who exactly are you, Mr. Ellison?" Darius reached into a small inner pocket that Harker had missed during the roadside search. He removed a black leather credential wallet. He opened it and placed it on the counter. Under the fluorescent lights, the gold insignia of the United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps caught Sloan's attention immediately. Beside it was Darius's military identification. "I'm Colonel Darius Ellison," Darius said. "I'm a presiding military judge in the United States Army. My legal counsel and federal authorities are on their way to this facility." The color left Sloan's face. Harker stopped chewing his toothpick. Darius turned his eyes toward him. The officer's smirk was gone. For the first time, Harker seemed to understand the size of the problem he had created. The change in Harker was immediate because the facts had not changed, only his understanding of the person standing in front of him. Darius noticed that clearly. The same man who had been spoken to with contempt on the roadside was suddenly being viewed through the lens of rank, military authority, and federal access. That contrast only strengthened Darius's point. He did not want Harker frightened because he had arrested a colonel. He wanted the officer held accountable because the conduct would have been wrong if Darius had been a mechanic, a teacher, a delivery driver, or an unemployed man traveling home. The Constitution did not become more powerful when a gold credential wallet appeared. That was why Darius had hidden his military identification in the first place. He had wanted to know whether ordinary compliance would be enough to earn ordinary dignity. Now he had his answer. Darius's voice remained quiet. "I'll see you in court, Officer Harker." The silence in the intake room became heavy. Sergeant Sloan stared at the military credentials on the counter as though they had changed the temperature of the room. Harker stood motionless. Only moments earlier, he had believed he was dealing with a man who had no influence and no immediate way to challenge him. Now he understood that he had detained, searched, restrained, and mocked a senior military judge who possessed both legal expertise and direct access to federal resources. "Colonel," Sloan said, his voice unsteady, "there has obviously been a serious misunderstanding. We had no idea who you were." "My identity and rank are not the point, Sergeant," Darius replied. "The Constitution does not protect people according to prestige. Your officer conducted what I believe was a pretextual stop, manufactured probable cause, searched my vehicle over my explicit objection, and used excessive force. My position only means I have immediate access to resources that many other citizens do not." Harker finally spoke. "You were swerving, Ellison. I saw you. You refused a lawful order. Badge or no badge, you don't get to drive however you want." Darius did not turn toward him. Sergeant Sloan, I suggest that Officer Harker's access to departmental computer terminals, evidence storage and recording systems be restricted immediately. If the footage from Car 47 or any body camera data becomes damaged, deleted or corrupted, the consequences will become much more serious. Sloan looked at Harker. Blaine, give me your keys.
What?
Cruiser keys, locker keys, all of them. Sarge, you can't be serious. You're taking his word over mine. Give me the keys, Harker. Sloan's voice cracked through the room with enough force to make Harker flinch. Harker unclipped the heavy key ring from his belt and tossed it onto the counter. Then the station doors opened. Sheriff Preston Vance hurried into the intake room, clearly pulled away from home without warning. His uniform jacket had been thrown on in a rush. What is going on here, Sloan? He demanded. Dispatch just received a call from the local Federal Bureau of Investigation field office. They're sending people here to secure a federal prisoner. Who are we holding? Before Sloan could answer, Darius spoke. You don't have a federal prisoner. Sheriff Vance, you have a man your department detained without lawful cause. Vance looked at Darius. He noticed the rumpled clothes, the red marks around the wrists and the controlled posture. Then he saw the military credentials on the counter. His expression changed immediately. Vance began offering solutions. A private office, coffee, a comfortable chair, a ride back to the Taurus. Darius declined all of them. He remained in the intake area, where the cameras could see him and where everyone entering the station could see the visible consequences of what had happened. Harker paced at the edge of the room, speaking angrily into his personal phone. Deputy Pierce stood near the wall, pale and rigid. Then, several vehicles arrived behind the station. Doors closed outside. The entrance opened again, and the atmosphere inside the small county facility changed instantly. Captain Grant Mercer entered first. He was a sharply dressed Judge Advocate General liaison from Fort Stewart. With him were federal agents wearing tactical vests marked with the full name of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Conrad Ellis, an experienced civil rights investigator from the Atlanta field office, stepped forward and scanned the room until he found Darius. Colonel Ellison, Captain Mercer said, giving a crisp salute. Darius returned it. Captain Mercer, thank you for coming. Agent Ellis approached Sheriff Vance and displayed his federal credentials. Sheriff Preston Vance, I'm Special Agent Conrad Ellis with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We are assuming federal jurisdiction over the civil rights aspects of this incident under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. Colonel Ellison is to be released immediately. We are also securing the dash camera and body camera records connected to Officer Blaine Harker and Deputy Nolan Pierce, along with the relevant dispatch audio. Vance looked stunned. Agent Ellis, this is a local matter. A misunderstanding. We were already working on his release. There's no reason to turn this into a federal spectacle. The spectacle started before we arrived, Sheriff, Ellis replied. We're here to preserve the evidence. Where is your server room? Federal agents began securing the recordings. They moved methodically rather than dramatically. One agent focused on the station's digital systems. Another requested the relevant cruiser records, dispatch audio, body camera material, dash camera video, and surveillance footage were treated as evidence that had to be preserved before anyone could alter, misplace, or reinterpret it. Darius watched the process without celebrating. This was not revenge to him, it was procedure. That distinction mattered. He had spent years insisting that courts follow rules even when the accused person was unpopular or the evidence looked overwhelming. He could not demand less discipline simply because he was now the person claiming his rights had been violated. Deputy Pierce watched too. The young deputy looked as though the consequences of his silence were becoming real in front of him. He had not placed the cuffs on Darius, and he had not invented the marijuana smell, but he had been there. He had heard the words, he had seen the search, he had hesitated, then obeyed. Darius had already told him the central issue. A person with authority cannot always avoid responsibility by saying someone else gave the order. Captain Mercer stepped close to Darius and looked at the marks around his wrists. Are you all right, sir? Medical personnel are outside. I'm fine, Grant. Let's leave. I have a legal fight to prepare for, and unfortunately this one is mine. Darius turned toward the exit. Harker could not let him go without one more attempt to reclaim control. "You think you can walk in here and ruin my life over a traffic stop?" Harker said. "You people always want to play the victim." Agent Ellis stopped. His expression hardened. But Darius answered first. "I'm not ruining your life, Officer Harker. You created these consequences yourself when you treated your badge like permission to act on prejudice. I'm simply refusing to let what happened disappear." Then Darius walked out of the Oconee County Sheriff's Department with federal agents around him. The roadside stop had ended. The legal reckoning had begun. Later, the setting changed from a county station to the polished wood and quiet conference rooms of a Savannah law firm. Darius sat at the head of a long table inside Shaw & Associates, a respected civil rights litigation firm, and had chosen not to represent himself. As a judge, he understood how easily personal involvement could distort judgment. He needed an attorney who could look at the case with distance, precision, and discipline. He chose Evelyn Shaw. Evelyn had built her career handling civil rights cases against powerful public institutions. She was direct, relentless, and exceptionally prepared. She also understood what Darius wanted. "I was not interested in a quiet payment that would make the case disappear. I wanted accountability on the public record. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has completed its preliminary criminal review," Evelyn said, displaying documents on a screen. "The Department of Justice is moving forward with federal charges against Blaine Harker related to civil rights violations and battery. That's the criminal side. Our case is the civil action against Harker, Sheriff Vance, and Oconee County." Colonel Warren Calloway sat nearby in his personal capacity as Darius's longtime friend. "What does the dash camera show?" he asked. Evelyn gave a grim smile. "Everything we needed it to show." She played the footage from Car 47. The room became quiet. On the screen, Darius's Taurus traveled steadily between the lane markings. Harker's cruiser closed the distance and followed aggressively. The audio captured the condescending language, the commands, the claim that Darius had been swerving, the assertion that Harker smelled marijuana, and the sharp metallic sound of handcuffs being tightened. Darius watched his own detention unfold on the screen. "It's worse seeing it from this angle," he said quietly. Evelyn paused the video on Harker's face as he searched the trunk. "There is more." She opened another file. "During discovery, we obtained Harker's internal affairs history. Sheriff Vance fought the subpoena and argued that the records were protected personnel information. The federal court ordered production." A spreadsheet appeared. "Blaine Harker has spent years with the Oconee County Sheriff's Department. During his tenure, he accumulated 22 excessive force complaints. 18 were filed by black motorists passing through his jurisdiction. 3 resulted in quiet settlements paid by the county, all tied to non-disclosure agreements." Darius's jaw tightened. "That's not an isolated incident. That's a pattern." "Exactly," Evelyn said. "The county repeatedly dealt with complaints without correcting the underlying conduct. There is also evidence that Sheriff Vance knew about Harker's history and still allowed him to remain on highway enforcement assignments, connected to traffic citations and civil asset forfeitures." She changed the document on the screen. "And this is the part that changes the case completely." A sworn affidavit appeared. "Deputy Nolan Pierce," Evelyn continued. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation interviewed him. He gave a full statement. Pierce says that when Harker first noticed your vehicle, Harker told him they were stopping you because a black man driving a car that nice in that area was probably dealing drugs or driving something stolen." Calloway leaned back. "Pierce finally talked." "Han did more than talk," Evelyn said. "He admitted that Harker regularly claimed to smell marijuana as a way to justify searches. He also said Sheriff Vance encouraged deputies to pay special attention to vehicles registered outside the county." Darius looked at the affidavit. "He's frightened," Darius said. "He's a young officer who realized he was sitting beside conduct he could no longer defend. I told him on the roadside that silence could make him complicit. Apparently he listened." Evelyn studied Darius for a moment. She understood that Pierce's testimony mattered for more than strategy. His statement connected the roadside stop to a broader pattern that could not easily be dismissed as one officer losing his temper in one isolated encounter. The dash camera could show how Darius drove. The body camera could capture the commands and the tone. The search itself could show there was no contraband, but Pierce could explain motive. He had been inside the cruiser before the lights activated. He had heard Harker say why he wanted to stop the Taurus. That distinction was crucial. Without Pierce, The county could argue about judgment, perception, and officer safety. With Pierce, the jury could hear evidence that the decision to target Darius began before any alleged traffic violation. For Darius, that was the most painful part of the affidavit. He had done everything carefully, yet the decision to view him as suspicious had already been made. The conference room intercom sounded. "Miss Shaw, the county's attorney is calling. They're asking whether you're open to mediation." Evelyn looked at Darius. "They're nervous. I expect they want to offer a very large settlement in exchange for ending this quietly. If they can keep the internal affairs records and Pierce's affidavit from becoming central public exhibits, they will try." Darius rose and walked toward the window overlooking the Savannah Marsh. Han thought about the other people named in those complaints. People who did not carry military credentials. People who did not have immediate access to federal investigators. People who may have gone home humiliated, frightened, financially strained, or convinced that challenging the system was impossible. He turned back to the table. "Tell them I decline mediation." Evelyn watched him. Whatever they offer, tell them to prepare for trial." A small smile crossed Evelyn's face. She pressed the intercom. "Please inform opposing counsel that we decline mediation. We'll see them in federal court." The case moved forward. Harker and the people who had protected him had selected the wrong person to intimidate, not because Darius deserved more rights than anyone else, but because he had the knowledge and resources to force the entire system into the open. The civil trial of Ellison versus Harker, Vance and Oconee County drew national attention. Journalists filled the courthouse because the case offered an unusually detailed view into allegations of discriminatory traffic enforcement, unlawful searches, excessive force, and institutional failure. Darius sat at the plaintiff's table in a charcoal suit. His posture was straight. His expression was controlled. This was familiar territory to him. A courtroom did not intimidate him. It demanded evidence, procedure, and patience, all things Darius understood intimately. Evelyn Shaw sat beside him, reviewing notes. Across the room, the defense looked far less comfortable. Blaine Harker no longer wore a badge or uniform. He sat in an ill-fitting brown suit, stiff and visibly tense. Beside him was Victor Langley, an expensive defense attorney retained through the county's insurer. Sheriff Preston Vance sat at the far end of the table, sweating despite the cool courtroom. During the opening phase of the trial, Langley tried to portray Harker as an aggressive but sincere officer who had simply misread a difficult situation. The defense argued that he believed he was acting within the law and tried to invoke qualified immunity. Evelyn dismantled the argument piece by piece. Then she called Nolan Pierce. Pierce was no longer employed by the Oconee County Sheriff's Department. I walked toward the witness stand with nervous, careful steps. He took the oath and sat down without looking toward Harker or Vance. Evelyn approached. "Mr. Pierce, please tell the jury what Officer Harker said when he first noticed Colonel Ellison's vehicle." Pierce took a breath and gripped the edge of the witness stand. He pointed at the car. Pierce said he saw the out-of-county plate and said that a black man driving a vehicle that expensive in that area was probably dealing drugs or driving something stolen. Then he said, "Let's go hunting." A murmur moved through the courtroom. The statement was ugly precisely because it was so direct. Longley objected, but Judge Theodore Marsh allowed the testimony as a statement by a party opponent and evidence relevant to motive. Evelyn continued. "Did Colonel Ellison's vehicle cross the center line?" "No, ma'am." "Did he drive erratically?" "No, ma'am. He stayed in his lane." "What about the marijuana smell Officer Harker said gave him probable cause to search?" Pierce shook his head. "There wasn't any smell. He made it up. Harker had told me before that saying you smelled marijuana was an easy way to justify getting into a vehicle without first going to a judge." The defense attacked Pierce during cross-examination. Langley accused him of changing his story to protect himself and obtain favorable treatment from federal investigators. He suggested Pierce had been too weak for law enforcement and now wanted someone else to blame. Pierce held firm. More importantly, the recordings supported him. The dash camera showed Darius maintaining his lane. The audio documented Darius repeatedly stating that he was complying and refusing consent to a search. The search produced nothing illegal. But the most damaging moment came when the defense decided to put Harker himself on the witness stand. Harker walked to the box and tried to recover the same confidence he had shown on the roadside. Under Langley's questioning, he said Darius's legal language had made him suspicious. He claimed he believed a crime might be occurring. He insisted that any mistakes were honest mistakes made while trying to protect public safety. Then Evelyn stood for cross-examination. She did not rush. She let the silence settle before asking her first question. Mr. Harker, you testified that after learning Colonel Ellison's identity at the station, your main concern was correcting what you believed had been a misunderstanding. Is that your testimony? Yes, ma'am. Evelyn walked to the evidence table and picked up a transcript. Do you remember using your personal phone while Colonel Ellison was still inside the intake room? Harker's face changed. I make a lot of calls. I don't remember a specific one. Let me help you remember. Evelyn turned toward the judge. Your Honor. Plaintiff's Exhibit 42. This is audio obtained by the Federal Bureau of Investigation through a lawful subpoena involving Sheriff Vance's voicemail. Sheriff Vance shifted abruptly at the defense table. Longley objected, but the evidence had already survived pre-trial challenges. Evelyn activated the recording. Harker's own voice filled the courtroom. Preston, it's Blaine. Pick up. We've got a serious problem at the station. I stopped that black guy on Route 441 like we talked about with the quota thing, but he's a military judge. Judge Advocate General. He's got federal people coming. You need to get down here. We need to wipe the server. That dash camera is going to bury me. Call me back. When the recording ended, the courtroom went still. Harker sat frozen. Sheriff Vance lowered his face into his hands. Evelyn turned back toward the witness. Mr. Harker, you told this jury that you made an honest mistake and then tried to correct it. Your own recorded voice refers to a quota, acknowledges the importance of Colonel Ellison's race, and asks the sheriff to wipe the server because you believe the dash camera would expose what happened. Were you truthful with this jury? Harker's composure collapsed. That was taken out of context. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. No further questions, Your Honor. She returned to the plaintiff's table. Darius did not smile. He simply watched the man who had tried to take away his dignity struggle against the weight of his own recorded words. She had imagined this moment many times, but there was no satisfaction in seeing another person collapse under evidence of his own choices. Darius felt something colder and quieter. The recording had done what anger never could. It had removed excuses. Harker had claimed the stop was about swerving. The dash camera contradicted that claim. He had claimed the vehicle search was supported by the smell of marijuana. Pierce said the smell had been invented. He had claimed the station incident was a misunderstanding. His own voicemail referred to a quota and asked that the server be wiped because the dash camera would bury him. Each layer of the defense had been challenged in a different form of evidence. That was why Darius had stayed calm on the roadside. That was why he had narrated his movements. That was why he had denied consent clearly. That was why he had told Sloan to preserve the recordings. A courtroom could only act on what could be shown. Now almost everything could be shown. At that point, the central facts were no longer difficult to see. The jury returned a unanimous verdict for Darius on every major count presented to them, including false imprisonment, assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments. Then came damages. The jury awarded Darius $2 million in compensatory damages. The punitive award was far larger. To punish egregious misconduct and deter similar behavior, the jury imposed $12 million in punitive damages against Harker, Sheriff Vance, and Oconee County. Victor Langley's pen fell onto the table. Harker lowered his head and wept. Vance stared at the wood in front of him, understanding that his professional future had collapsed. The civil verdict was only the beginning of the consequences. The evidence revealed in court, especially the voicemail recording, accelerated the federal criminal case. Harker eventually pleaded guilty in federal court to deprivation of rights under color of law and obstruction of justice. He received a federal prison sentence of 8 years. Sheriff Preston Vance also faced federal charges connected to the quota scheme and the effort to conceal systemic civil rights violations. He resigned and later accepted a plea agreement on a lesser charge. He served 3 years in a minimum security federal facility. The Oconee County Sheriff's Department was placed under a federal consent decree. The Department of Justice required major reforms. Use of force policies were rewritten. Bias training became mandatory. Outside audits were imposed. Supervisory practices and evidence preservation procedures were subjected to greater scrutiny. Nolan Pierce, whose cooperation helped expose the wider pattern, left the department. Later, he received a letter of recommendation, quietly written by a certain military judge. Pierce eventually found work with a specialized state investigative bureau where integrity and accountability were treated as professional obligations rather than betrayals of loyalty. Darius remained steady through all of it. He accepted the money awarded through the civil case, but he did not keep it for personal use. Instead, he established the Ellison Foundation for Constitutional Defense, a non-profit legal fund dedicated to providing strong legal representation for marginalized citizens who experienced police misconduct in rural jurisdictions. The money that could have become a private reward became a resource for people who did not have his connections, rank, or legal training. The decision reflected the question that had stayed with Darius since the station. What would have happened if Harker had stopped someone who did not know Terry versus Ohio, Delaware versus Prowse, or Pennsylvania versus Mims? What would have happened if that person had no secure line to Fort Stewart, no longtime friend in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, and no ability to bring federal investigators to a small county station? Darius could not change what those other motorists had experienced. He could not give them back the hours of fear or humiliation described in the complaint files. He could not erase settlements that had required silence. What he could do was make the next person less alone. The foundation was built around that idea. Legal knowledge should not belong only to people who could afford expensive counsel. A citizen should not need an impressive title before an institution takes a constitutional complaint seriously. If Darius's case had exposed a door, he wanted that door held open for others. Darius eventually stood in full dress uniform at the United States Army War College in Pennsylvania. The dark uniform was decorated with medals earned over a long military career, and the gold insignia of the Judge Advocate General's Corps caught the light as he stepped to the podium. Colonel Warren Calloway stood near the back of the lecture hall watching his friend. The seats were filled with officers preparing for greater leadership responsibilities. Darius looked across the room. Before we begin our study of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, we need to acknowledge a basic truth about authority, he said. The uniform you wear, the rank you hold, and the badge you carry are not shields that allow personal prejudice to hide behind official power. They are burdens of public trust. The room remains still. When that trust is used against the very people we are sworn to protect, the harm goes beyond a technical violation. It damages the promise that law is supposed to mean the same thing for everyone. Darius paused and looked at the young officers in front of him. They would become commanders, advisors, investigators, attorneys, and decision-makers. Many of them would one day hold power over people who had less authority than they did. The law is not a weapon for humiliating people, Darius continued. It is a shield meant to protect them. And when the people trusted to carry that shield become the source of harm, accountability is not an attack on the institution. Accountability is how an honorable institution proves that its principles are real. He stepped back slightly. Now let's turn to page 1. The legal battle was over. The corrupt conduct had been exposed. The people responsible had faced consequences. The department had been forced to change. Darius returned to the work that had always mattered most to him, the disciplined pursuit of justice and the belief that law should be a promise available to everyone, not a privilege reserved for the powerful. And that is what makes this story larger than one traffic stop, one officer, or one courtroom. Darius had every reason to respond with anger, but he chose discipline. He had the status to demand special treatment, but he refused to make his rank the reason he deserved dignity. He understood that if respect under the law only appears after someone reveals an impressive title, then the system has already failed the people who have no title to reveal. Nolan Pierce faced a different test. At first, fear kept him quiet. He followed the stronger personality beside him because speaking up carried a cost, but eventually he chose truth over protection. His decision did not erase his earlier silence, yet it showed that responsibility can begin the moment a person decides to stop participating in what they know is wrong. The lesson is not that every conflict must become a dramatic courtroom battle. It is that character often shows itself in smaller choices long before the final consequence arrives. A badge, a title, a uniform, a position, or any form of authority can be used to serve people or to diminish them. The choice belongs to the person holding that power. Kindness matters because dignity matters. Restraint matters because anger can make a difficult moment worse. Courage matters because silence can protect wrongdoing. Accountability matters because consequences are one of the ways trust is rebuilt. And forgiveness, when it is possible, does not require pretending that harm never happened. It can exist alongside truth, responsibility, and meaningful change. Real strength is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like a man standing beside a car with his hands visible, refusing to surrender his self-control. Sometimes it looks like a frightened young deputy finally telling the truth. Sometimes it looks like using a victory not to enrich yourself, but to make sure the next person has a fair chance to be heard. That is the kind of justice that lasts beyond a verdict. It reminds us to judge people by their actions rather than assumptions, to use whatever authority we have with humility, and to remember that the way we treat someone who appears powerless may reveal more about our character than the way we treat someone important. If this legal drama about courage, accountability, and the quiet strength to stand for what is right stayed with you, share it with someone who values stories about justice. Like the video if you want to support more narratives like this, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary tests of character. And if Darius Ellison's calm response, Nolan Pierce's eventual decision to speak, or the final courtroom reckoning made you think differently about power and responsibility, share your thoughts in the comments. The strongest lesson may be simple. We do not control every situation we are placed in, but we do control the choices we make once we are there, and those choices can shape consequences far beyond ourselves. Darius could not control Harker's prejudice. Pierce could not undo the moment he first remained silent. Sloan could not erase what had already happened before Darius entered the station. Even the department could not reverse the harm simply by offering a private office and a cup of coffee after learning who Darius was. What each person could control was the next decision. Harker could have stopped escalating. Pierce could choose whether to keep protecting the story or tell the truth. Sloan could preserve the evidence instead of ignoring warning signs. Sheriff Vance could cooperate instead of minimizing the problem. Darius could choose whether his victory ended with personal compensation or became something that helped strangers. Those choices are where responsibility lives. A good life is rarely built from one perfect decision. More often, it is shaped by the habit of choosing dignity when humiliation would be easier, truth when silence would be safer, humility when power makes arrogance tempting, and accountability when excuses are available. That does not mean people should accept mistreatment quietly or pretend serious harm is insignificant. Darius did neither. He stood firmly on his rights, preserved the evidence, sought legal accountability, and refused to let the matter disappear. Yet he did so without becoming the kind of person who had harmed him. That may be the deepest victory in the entire story. Justice changed the department. Evidence changed the case. Consequences changed careers. But Darius's character did not need to become cruel in order to become strong. And perhaps that is worth carrying beyond the courtroom. Whenever we hold power, however small, we can use it to make another person's path heavier or lighter. Whenever we witness unfairness, we can decide whether comfort matters more than truth. Whenever we are wronged, we can seek accountability without surrendering the values we want the world to protect. That is how dignity becomes more than an idea. It becomes a choice, repeated until it becomes character.